Welcome, Chinedu, to our discussion in regards to areas of race and STEM. Thank you for joining me. We've known each other for a little while,
Right.
in different capacities, obviously. I know your background. I'm not going to go too much into detail because I'd like for you to explain what that looks like to our listeners momentarily. But I'd like to start off a number of my discussions with some interesting questions or some hard-hitting questions to begin with, at least, anyway. And the first one I have for you today is, as a person of color, what does today's world of STEM look like through your eyes?
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. Thanks for having me.
That's all right.
Yeah, as a black man, what does today's world of STEM look like through my eyes? Science, technology, engineering, and maths. It's a constantly evolving and expanding field, right? Driven by new technologies, advancements in technology, new discoveries. I work in the pharmaceutical industry. I've been in the pharma industry for more than 20 years now. And one of the areas where I see STEM advancing and continually expanding is in the field of biotechnology, right?
Mhm.
We have new breakthroughs in technology like gene editing, for instance. You have regenerative medicines. The other area where I see all the growth and expansion also is in the field of climate change and sustainability. There is kind of a drive in that area also to find solutions to reduce greenhouse emissions. For instance, we were just talking about cars now. Part of the drive there is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by moving into electric cars. Improve energy efficiencies. We have all these new technology with energy efficiency light bulbs and stuff that are supposed to last longer and draw very little energy. So there is opportunities there also for people then to come into that field, and contribute their knowledge and experience into that.
Tell us about you, Chinedu, your background, where you're from, your upbringing.
Right. Yeah, I was born in Nigeria. I grew up in Nigeria a long time ago. So I was educated in Nigeria from primary school through to university. So did my first degree, my bachelor's of science degree in Nigeria. And then I migrated to England in the early 90s to do postgraduate studies, and carried on with a master's in analytical sciences and a PhD in the same field. So, but my foundational years were in Nigeria, right? So, and I grew up in what I'll call a middle class family, and education was important for my parents. My dad was, he's alive. He's a civil engineer. My mom is a science school teacher, so for them, education was important, and they had to sacrifice and make all the efforts to get myself and my siblings through school. However, by the time I left university in the late 80s and was thinking about what next to do, I would say the shift was somewhat noticeable in that as a chemistry student in university pursuing my first degree, the experiments had moved from theoretical to virtual at the time. And fortunately, my parents also understood that we needed to move and advance. And so, yeah, we looked and thought, okay, go ahead and do a postgraduate studies either in the US or in England. And because my parents' schooling background was in the UK, so it was a kind of a no-brainer, really, that ended up in the UK. Studying chemistry in the University of Hull, finished my postgraduate studies there, and moved into the pharma industry.
And how did you get into the pharma industry? You obviously studied, What was your route into actually working for a company?
There was no sort of magic wand to it, really. It was just kind of, I looked at my degree, and the interest at the time was using what we call chromatographic equipment, liquid chromatography equipment. So that was where my research was focused on. And the beauty of that, it's a tool that enables you quantify, impurities, components, and so I could have gone into any industry, right?
Mm.
But at that time, I can't recall exactly what there was a pool to get into pharmacy, and it probably ties in with the fact that back in university when I started my first degree, I was more into. I didn't want to study medicine because that's what every African parent wants you to do,
Mhm.
to go and
Mhm.
become a medical doctor. I didn't want to study medicine. I was very kind of squeamish about blood and the human body. So it wasn't something for me at all. And so the next best thing I thought to myself was pharmacy.
Well, if you don't mind, just reveal as much as you can anyway,
Yeah,
your early job titles to your current job title, just so that our listeners can hear
yeah.
the type of positions that you've had.
So senior scientist, then I went to principal scientist. Again, that was in Ireland. And then by the time I came back from Ireland, I found another, looked for another job in the UK, came back as an associate director.
Okay.
At this point, I'd moved on from the lab, became more quality assurance personnel, associate director, and then identified gaps that I wanted to plug in the biotechnology, large molecules, and the opportunity came in Belgium. And Brussels, so I moved to that role as an associate director as well. And was a learning field. And I left Belgium, came back to England as a director,
Hmm.
found another position back in GSK, where I started as a director of compliance and operations. And then when the company split into GSK Pharmaceuticals and Helion, I moved into Helion, which is where I was anyway in the consumer healthcare, as where I am currently as the director of compliance as well.
Okay. So so you've gone from senior scientist to
Mhm.
director of
Yeah,
compliance, working across pharma, biopharm,
exactly.
generics, all
Yeah.
sorts. Okay, great. Thinking about your career progression from when you
Mm.
started to current, why is there a lack of black men in industry, especially at a senior level?
It's not one reason. There are multiple reasons. I mean, let's look at the elephant in the room, right? Systemic racism. That it's no doubt one of those areas where it's no news. It's not my own news. I think it's common. Um, if you've listened to the news recently, you would have seen the Met Police and the criticisms they've had. We're talking about Steve Lawrence 25 years ago when they were criticized for being systemically racist. And the report yesterday was still damning in that sense that is there. So that is just the Met Police because it's come to the limelight. Then look at other organizations, do they have the same sort of level of scrutiny, but what makes them different? So I would say that black men face that systemic racism and discrimination in the workplace, and of course, it will limit the opportunities for advancement. There's no doubt about it. Um, it's unlikely they will be given the same opportunities for training and development. You really have to go for it and push for it. The other thing I would say that is responsible for such lack of black men in the industry at that level is also implicit bias in the hiring and promotion.
Mm.
Um, People I think, they are judged based on stereotypes or assumptions rather than the qualifications and accomplishments that they have. People will see, I've had feedback in my time that I'm seen as aggressive and non-cooperative, right? If you assert yourself, you're seen as the angry black man. If you want to calm down, you're seen as not being. So finding that balance, because obviously there is that bias by the hiring managers, and when you have people who don't look like you as the decision makers, it's sometimes difficult, you know. So that's the thing. When I said people don't look like you, it's lack of representation. When you don't have role models to look up to, you don't have people who understand where you're coming from.
Mm.
It makes it difficult. You know, in my early days to sort of move up the ladder. So that's why I kept moving from one family to another and looking for those opportunities to fit into and grow. You know, so I think, yeah, the systemic racism, the bias, and then the lack of representation, it's probably the main reasons I'll say that it's contributed to lack of black men in the industry.
Well,
That,
you just touched on something there, which I think I want to delve into a little bit more. You know, we're talking about your career progression,
yeah,
and how, you know, black men might be perceived. I mean, we're talking generically now,
yeah,
obviously, okay?
yeah,
And you've obviously got your personal experience.
yeah,
So you can obviously have a say on this because of your personal, you know,
that's right.
experience within industry, which is
Yeah,
absolutely fine. Um, Note, it might not be the same for everyone, but this is your personal experience.
absolutely. Yeah.
As a person of, as a professional within STEM, how have you navigated your career progression as a black man from senior scientist to
Yeah.
director?
I think you know, one of the ways that is, you know, for me, that's unstructured and looking back, it's the fact that I moved from one industry to another, went to places where maybe people didn't want to go, or something, you know, looked for those roles where I would small and, you know, kind of, give me the opportunity to expand my skill set and take on more responsibilities. So it was also a bit disruptive for my family as well, because at some point I was moving around alone, you know, just to
Mm,
be able to, you know, to grow. So you kind of miss the early years of your children because you don't want to be moving them from one country to another.
yeah.
Place them. So I moved around, and that was the downside of doing that for me, you know, looking back. But you know, I also want to look at this as what I've learned, right? And maybe what would have served me better. That if anybody's listening to me and thinking about how to navigate their career progression, I'd say, you know, when you get in, seek out mentors and allies. That's the first thing. And that is what GSK Helion did for me, you know, to begin to say, look, you know, we have mentors, we have some senior guys that look like you in the place. You need to build a relationship with them. What they do, what happens is that you kind of gain from the experience because they have been in the same industry, so they understand it. They can offer you guidance and
Mm.
support, and then how, and even advocacy, right? They can advocacy within the organization in terms of seeing that you grow and you benefit from that. You know, one of the things I didn't do early enough is building strong professional networks. I was really not very good at building networks, and I found it as more of a challenge, you know, to
That's
keep
interesting.
that network, right?
Mm,
Um, so I didn't have that training. I didn't have those opportunities and understanding because I didn't have those mentors either to understand the importance of networks and having to build them. Even when I began to understand the importance of professional networks and keeping one, I was still struggling on how to build it, you know. Networking is really critical for career advancement because what you then do is you begin to relate with these guys. They also getting into higher positions of seniority in different organizations, and there's potential then that you know you can advance your career through that as well. The other thing I was going to say is it's the uh, um, continuous professional development.
mm,
You know, the thing I did was I continued to develop my skills, moving from bench scientist then to pre-formulation, new technologies, trying to get up to speed with that, and you know, making myself marketable in that sense, and also beginning to understand how the whole picture fits in. So it was took advantages anywhere that there was training and development opportunities, and so that sort of helped me move through that.
I really respect and love that last
Mm,
note that you said there, making yourself marketable,
absolutely.
through learning, through development,
Mm,
through courses, whether they're internal or external, being able to upgrade yourself,
that's right.
on a regular basis, so that the companies that you're applying to, or the companies that you're having
Mm,
conversations with, they can see that you're up to date. They can see
exactly.
that you've got a skill set that they can utilize and use, not looking at it from we need a director who's a black man, for
That's right.
example, but they're looking at you from a case of you're a professional
Mm,
who has got the skill set of what we're looking for, and we need you to drive this for us internally. And it just so happens that you are a black man of
black man.
Nigerian
A-
descent,
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I really like the fact that you're taking responsibility.
Yeah.
This is what I take from it anyway. You're taking responsibility to upgrade and upskill yourself, to make yourself marketable.
Yeah.
And a lot of conversations I've had, and I think this is right, the
Mm,
community of networking, speaking to people professionally,
yeah.
being able to be a part of groups, communities where you can interact with others professionally and behind the scenes, allows for development as well. It might
Absolutely.
not be easy to do so, and I can
Mm,
imagine there are definitely some challenges there with that, but it is very important.
yes.
And that comes across, women who I've spoken to, men who I've spoken to,
Yeah.
people who are from, the LGBTQ plus community.
Mm,
Everyone talks about networking, and I
networking.
think that's very, very powerful. You
Yeah.
mentioned as well that you have children, and uprooting, was not easy,
No.
but it obviously serves its purpose for your career development.
Yeah.
How old are your children? What are their passions? What are they into? What are they?
I've got two. I've got two children, a son and a daughter. My son is 21. My daughter is 18. They're both in university now. Also in sciences. I think that
Okay.
was easy. It was easy.
I'm seeing a bit of a trend here. So your mum was a
Yeah,
science teacher, you're
exactly.
a scientist, you work
Yeah,
in industry, and your children are now going to
and
be
now
carrying on the
and
tradition.
yeah.
Okay.
I think for me and for my children, it was relatively easy because if you look at the what do you call it? People around them.
Yeah.
I'm a scientist. My wife is a scientist. My dad is an engineer. My mom is a school science teacher. Even my late father-in-law is an electrical engineer. So
Okay.
it was all that in the whole family, and yeah. So they're in university, studying sciences, and so it's so far so good. And that's
With your
yeah.
experience of, some of the microaggressions, the bias that
Mm,
you've spoken about today, your children obviously now of an age where they understand, they can
yeah.
see things.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you encourage your children then to drive and succeed a career within STEM, being of color?
That's a good question. There isn't anything like the magic wand or any sort of bright ideas in that sense, but just being there for them, right? Talking about my experiences, it's
Mm,
important. I don't gloss over anything. I'm as factual as I can be, and make it clear that these are the challenges that exist,
yeah,
right? So you're bound to encounter it. I think it's getting better. The landscape is changing. There's more diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across many industries. We're seeing that.
yeah,
We're seeing people of color coming. in my organization, for instance, there's the sort of focus on increasing ethnic minority quota in senior level, and that was a continued sort of discussion even in GSK, where the CEO gave that as part of sort of a speech in terms of what the numbers are, where they are going. So there is a shift, right? So I'm encouraged from that, but also tell my kids that you can't go there as the token Black person. You have to have the skill set, right? You have to get that degree and make sure you continue to improve your skills, and and also advise them that personally, I have to be resilient. So that's something you need to also bear in mind. That's important. You resistance and persistence. So have a goal and see what else you need to do to be getting there. Nothing comes to you on a platter of gold. You have to work for it,
Yes.
So I think that's having that open discussion about the challenges, the pitfalls, and then supporting and encouraging them as best as you can based on your experience, and don't gloss over anything.
That's a very honest approach, and I think one which they would appreciate.
Yeah.
You think about when you started your career in sciences, maybe say early 90s, for example. I'm pretty certain that there weren't DEI initiatives back then. So we live in a very different day and age now, where there are platforms, there are groups, it's where you can be a part of, to discuss, to have conversations about D&I, and what that looks like internally, and bring your external into the internal workplace to make a difference. Thinking about your career, you've worked for a number of different companies. What can organizations do to ensure that diverse talent of the younger generation coming through are given a seat at the table?
I think we talked about, we just touched a bit on that, the diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of programs that are there. That's one, to also, so that diversity, equity, and inclusion will promote, hopefully, that's the objective, part of the objective, to promote diversity and inclusion in most organizations. And, I can only talk about Helium, that they're proactively doing that. And that will kind of create a culture that, once you promote that, it creates a culture that will value that sort of DEI initiatives. It gives people the confidence, right, that they are part of the organization. I think companies. One of the things in the groups, there are these DEI groups that the organization has put in there to also help them become accountable. So those groups, will hold leaders accountable. So I'm part of those embrace groups, as we call them. And what it does is it's okay for leaders to say we have a target, but you have to have groups also that hold them accountable to that, making sure that they promote that the goals that they've set, that it's also tracked. And I think the other thing is, these big organizations can also look outside. When I say look outside, it's expand their recruitment efforts, right? When you come to interviews, for instance, I've been in so many interviews, and the first thing I get into is a panel of 3, 4, 5 white men, and I'm thinking like, okay, just from here, it doesn't look good. And so it's and to be honest, 9 out of 10 times it hasn't been good, right? When you come into that panel of 3, 4, because the interaction, maybe it's something that puts me on guard and then I don't express myself, or difficulty connecting, So yeah, organizations, if they can also expand their outreach and recruitment efforts, it'll definitely help bring these guys into the young Black people, young Black boys and girls into um, the organization. And as a member of the Royal Society, there's all these efforts on diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, where you go out and talk to people from sort of disadvantaged backgrounds.
Yes.
Their socioeconomic status is not helped in that sense, but you talk to them and have those discussions, and they ask you questions, and the more they see people that look like them in those areas, they're more encouraged to pursue efforts in the STEM. So I think those are the things that I would say that organizations can do to make sure that the young ones are
I
come
think
to the table.
yeah, I think
Mm.
that's interesting, and I interviewed someone about a year and a half to 2 years
Yeah.
ago who's very well known of within the pharmacovigilance sector anyway.
Mm.
And the interview, I think, piece is very interesting, one which I think I'd like to discuss at more length and in detail.
Mm.
As a person of color, when you're faced with an interview panel of 3, 4, 5 white people,
Yeah.
how do you approach that? How do you overcome? What do you do? What are some of the questions? And
Uh,
some people have said, I mean, I don't want you to answer this now because this will open up a whole other,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
how do you go about that? And, do you interview them? Do they interview you? What are you looking for? All these different types of questions, which I
Mm.
think might be interesting, but we'll,
Yeah.
we'll definitely catch up on that one another time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Coming to the end of the discussion, Chinedu, I want to
Mm.
ask, what is maybe one big change that you've noticed since you started your career in STEM?
Oh, as you know, as we just as we started, we talked about advances, and so there are many things, to
Yeah.
be honest.
Maybe
I
pick,
think,
maybe pick just one major
yeah,
one that stands out.
I think for me, it's the advancements in technology, right?
Okay.
It's a significant. I mean, when I started work in GSK back then in 1998 to what it is now. It's huge.
Mm.
We've talked about the internet. I remember back in those days when I was trying to write up my PhD thesis, to get on the internet, you hear that white noise. So,
The
you know,
dial-up.
the dialogue. My kids don't understand it. They have no clue.
Yeah.
So, the smartphones, what the smartphone is doing now that you can't see yourself without that smartphone is pretty much a car key, it's pretty much a house door key, it's pretty much your bank, it's your Oyster card, is your, everything.
Yeah.
So technology has transformed the way we live. We look on social media. We are more connected but less friends and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
but I criticize not being able to build professional networks, but it's also hard. So I think yeah, advancements in technology is the main thing,
That's the
really.
main one.
Yeah.
Okay. And last question.
Hmm.
Advice for you, your younger self, starting a career in STEM. What would you say to your younger self, Chinedu?
Ah, I maybe to just put it in context, right? I'll say beat my own drums a bit louder, advocate for myself. I come from Nigeria, as I said, right? And moving from Nigeria to UK presents its own challenges, right? So if you look at the what do you call it, the Hofstede's cultural dimensions, let's pick the power distance index, for instance, where Nigeria scores high. So there's a hierarchical sort of setup. Authority and power is from the center. You get told what to do. You don't speak till you're spoken to. Self mindset. So when I moved to UK, Britain has a PDL of 35. So it's equity. Everybody tools, right, for themselves, and you can challenge authority, decision making. There's a team effort. In Nigeria, it's not like that. So to move and reorientate myself to that was a bit of a challenge. And then I began to, it was only not too long ago, I began to understand that you need to advocate for yourself. You don't have to be afraid to speak up for yourself, particularly career progression. So constantly seeking feedback, asking for feedback, and then looking for new opportunities. And then, once you're offered a position where you know you are qualified, don't get that imposter syndrome. Don't let the imposter syndrome get into you. Be bold and say, I'm going to do this, but this title is what is probably commensurate with this role. The one I talked about before, seeking mentors and allies that will provide you guidance and direction, build relationships with them, and based on their experience, they can sort of help you through your career, advocate for you as well, and really seek opportunities wherever you are. Right, take on more things that will challenge you, contribute to it. One of the things I've always done is like I've done my job. So that is not a way to build a career. Don't wait for opportunities to come. Go out looking for it. Stretch assignments. That's another thing I've been sort of doing. But I did, these are things I learned much later. And if I'd known these when I started earlier on, I think I probably would have been more at home for my family rather than moving around and seeking those opportunities and missing out on the early formative years.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, listen, I'm sure that information there is information you part to your children, to those who are, up and coming.
Yeah.
You represent, obviously, what so many people starting out in their careers will aspire to be. And, the youngsters who are studying their GCSEs, their A levels, their degrees, their PhDs, their masters, they will always be looking for somebody to look up to, somebody who can be a mentor, an ally, somebody who can maybe steer them in a direction. And I think this is one of the powerful tools about what Race and STEM can offer and does offer. Across science, tech, engineering, and maths, we are bound to supporting everybody, no matter what age you might be. When the sex, the gender, it doesn't matter. We're bonded by a common story to help navigate and motivate people of color to be the best that they can be. And I truly do believe that, somebody like yourself, who was a scientist and now is a director at global pharmaceutical companies, which are very recognized, can be a symbol of greatness for somebody coming up who can say, I heard a discussion with Chinedu, or I've connected with him on LinkedIn, or I've seen him here and he's spoken there at this event, and all these different types of things. And it helped me think about my career and how I can develop and navigate. So may that continue to be, part of your journey. Thank you for your time. It's always much appreciated. And, I'm sure we'll laugh and catch up offline in the near future.
No doubt.
All right.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again.